pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda.
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor? 7-0. Next, we have public comment. During public comment, Dr. Decker will have
Yes.
a timer. Will that be visible to the
Yes.
speaker? Okay,
Yes, we're setting
perfect.
it now. Okay.
Please bear with us just a second while we get that set up.
Jacker's gonna go out really quick. Google a time.
The one on board docs is not coming on for us.
That's all right, we'll find one. We're good. We're ready.
Okay.
Does it have a cool like chime? Okay, like a train bell? There you go.
Okay, Becky Reimer.
Hi there.
Hello.
I'm Becky Reimer. It's nice to meet you all or see your faces today. I'm here with my kids requesting that you guys support facial freedom for the kids, especially in the schools, that they give the power back to the parents to be able to choose if they think it's what's best for the kids. So one of the things I think of when I see or hear somebody talking about smoke and a recent post on the Kansas Health website, Facebook page. They mentioned something about how we needed to make sure we kept ourselves safe against the smoke that was in the area. And one thing that they didn't even say was to wear a mask. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Smoke particles are bigger than COVID-19 particles. So I thought it was interesting that they had two different sides of that could have been a helpful thing if they knew that masks work that well. So I know a lot of faces back here are with me in voting for the mask freedom to choose to mask or not to mask. And I was wondering if you're here for the freedom of masks to choose or to wear one or not, if you would raise your hand just to show. So thank you for listening, and I hope you guys look out for the best effort, or best, sorry, I don't know why I got so nervous, but for the best interest for the parents and for the kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jenny Boozman.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Jenny Buznitz. I'm really nervous. I feel like I'm in an impromptu speech class or something, but I'm a mom of two girls. They're here with me. And I believe that they are gifts from God to me and my husband, and that it is my responsibility to care for their health. And so I make choices for them. I wish I could say I was a perfect mom. I got them to bed, had a good time every night, fed them fruits and vegetables all the time. Not perfectly, but I try. But I realize that there are lots of germs and diseases and sickness, and it will never go away. And it is my responsibility to care for them in the midst of that. Wearing masks is not one of those things that I believe is helpful for my children. So I give them supplements. There's lots of reports that vitamin D and vitamin C are huge helpers in fighting COVID. If children are even going to get it that much, I don't think there's much. I won't say they won't ever get it, but kids are not the ones who are the main thing. There's research that shows there's been very few, if any, hospitalizations of children due to COVID or anything. And so I too am asking that you give parents the freedom to choose what's best for their children, for their health, and to be responsible for that. I just keep thinking about the psychological, mental, emotional effects. It used to be that anybody you saw in a mask was probably a bank robber or breaking into your home, and that was a very scary thing. And now these kids are being brought up that it is normal to see everybody in masks. How do you know who's a scary person? Who do you trust? And for young kids learning to read and to speak, how can you show them how to say, if you're wearing a mask? I can't imagine being a teacher trying to teach young kids doing that. Make the sound. The kid can't see the mouth, the teacher can't see the kid to see if they're making the sound right. And if we're truly concerned about the education of our children, I think we, as Becky said, need to have the best interest in mind. So I too am asking that you consider giving parents the freedom to choose what's best for their children and even for the staff and the teachers. And take your vitamin D and C and zinc if you need it. Thank you.
Next, we have Keith Penner.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Keith Penner. I teach science at Santa Fe 5-6 Center. I'm here tonight to urge you to not merely recommend, but to require and enforce the COVID-19 health guidance given to you by the Harvey County Health Department. Harvey County currently has transmission rates that are at or above where they were when we started school last year. And we have a virus that is seemingly twice as infectious as it had been. On Wednesday evening, I will begin to meet with my students and their parents. My students are too young and do not yet have the option of vaccination. My students will be depending on me to do my best to keep them healthy. My students will find their science teacher masked and doing his best to follow the guidance of the medical science in order to keep them healthy. My students will find their teacher down the hall unmasked and with a much different message. My students will begin to learn that science need not be taken seriously. My students will be confused, and I imagine some will be fearful to come to school. My students and myself are depending on you to keep us healthy and engaged. This should be the easiest difficult decision you will ever be asked to make. Difficult because it will not be popular, but easy because it is you who has the ability to make the biggest difference in the health and well-being of hundreds of students and the staff that you employ. Please require and enforce the Harvey County Health Department COVID-19 guidance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Owen.
My name is Joe Owen. I have 3 kids in the Newton School District, one in Newton High School, one in Chisholm Middle School, and one in Santa Fe. And I didn't really prepare much to say really. I wanted to give personal experience, I guess, with wearing masks, what my kids had last year. My youngest in Santa Fe is a mild asthmatic, and he would often tell me stories about how he would get short of breath and feel like he couldn't really breathe in that mask, and would just simply pull it away from his face so he could take a breath of fresh air, which is something that an asthmatic needs to do pretty often, almost every time they take a breath, as a matter of fact. And quite often when he did that, his teacher would scold him for that and make him put his mask back on. So he continued short of breath throughout the day until he was able to go to recess or whatever they were doing, and he was able to pull it down outside or something like that and get a few breaths of fresh air. My Chisholm Middle School student, my daughter, my second daughter, she has never had issues with sinus infections or anything like that, and all throughout the school year last year, we have medical documentation where we had to repeatedly take her to the doctor and have her treated for sinus infections. And guess what? She hasn't had all summer long since she hasn't had to wear a mask. She hasn't had one sinus infection. It just magically cured up when she didn't have to have a mask. I find that more than just a coincidence. And then my oldest in high school, she had problems with fainting last year. And so we took her to the doctor quite concerned and got a diagnosis of low blood pressure. This has naturally low blood pressure, but while wearing the mask, you combine reduced oxygen intake with the low blood pressure, and all of a sudden she's fainting in classes and in school and having to get up and walk out and take a bathroom break so she could take the mask off and get some oxygen. And she hasn't had one fainting spell since she hasn't had to wear a mask all summer long. And so I just wanted to give some personal stories with at least my kids, and I'm sure that's all over the district, and I wish everybody could or would come in here and address those issues with you. It's proven that masks don't work even after mask mandates last year were put into place. Well after those were put into place, we saw continued rise in numbers until pretty much everybody had COVID, and then all of a sudden the numbers begin to fall. And if it was a legitimate issue, why in the world would the CDC continually change their reporting criteria so that it makes it look like the numbers are climbing every time they start to dip? I just don't understand it. And so if you call that science that you're following, maybe you should find some new science, is my answer to that. So I just wanted to encourage you. Hopefully you see there's a lot of community support, a lot of parents in the district who are supporting your decision to make masks a freedom of choice in Newton school districts. Thank you.
Our final speaker this evening is Anthony Cuellar.
I'm Anthony Cuellar. Some 25 years ago, San Francisco, the last day of an NEA convention, I was headed to Moscone Center. And down the street, I saw a panhandler coming the other way. I had a $10 bill in my pocket, and that was it, no change. I had a room and a plane ticket for the next day, but $10 was all I had for supper or anything else. And I didn't want to be in an uncomfortable position dealing with a panhandler, because we saw plenty at the wharf, and the Kansas delegation, they were a novelty, so we'd give them change and joke with them. But here in Moscone Center was a different class of people. All I had was a tent, and if I could hurry in the center, I could avoid the guy, so I did. And I noticed as he approached people, they ignored him. He was invisible. They just kept walking, never turning his way. And I got inside the center, and I went up, and I got inside the doors, and I turned to watch as people just passed him by, not even bothering to look at him. And I saw him asking, no response, and finally he dropped his arms to his side and he shouted. He wasn't shouting at anybody in particular. He was just shouting, I'm a human being. I exist, don't pretend. You don't see me. I'm a human being. And because of the one I was thinking earlier, I felt very far from my God at that moment. So I went downstairs and I gave him my $10. I looked him in the eye. He shook my hand. He said, God bless you. And I said, I'll be back in Kansas tomorrow, buddy. God bless you. You'll still be here. But what struck me in his anger and his shame, he wasn't mad he didn't get a bottle or money or food. All he wanted was to be acknowledged as a human being. And at the bottom of our buckets, that's all any of us want. It was one of those life-changing moments that you keep in your consciousness. But I was running through life then, trying to be a good father, a good husband, a good citizen. I didn't have time to stop and fix all the broken things I saw along the way. But I have some time now. And this is my anger and my disgust over that Lindy Hall name. If we can hark back to his glory days, we can hark back to those students' pain. Franklin, he didn't think of them as human beings. He didn't treat them as human beings. They didn't meet his criteria for being a human being. And as a Christian, as an educator, as a human being, that's repugnant to me. It should be to all of you. It's a blasphemy against our God. It's a scar upon our souls. And it demeans us as a community. The real cost of racism, the final cost of excusing and defending, and sanctioning, and ultimately honoring racism is it makes us less human. I have a petition of almost 1,000 names signed by past and present Newtonians and people in other communities trying to regain their humanity. Let Lindy's true legacy die. Keep racism out of Newton's future. Some force took that name off that building. You can replace it or not. But just remember, your decision ultimately marks your legacy.
The next item on the agenda is the budget presentation.
All right, well, tonight, as you presentation, and what it really is in front of all of you members of the board and the superintendent, assistant superintendent, is our budget booklet, which lays out what our expenditures are, or what we plan to have them be for this upcoming fiscal year. So I'll go over a couple of the highlights, but I really wanted to make sure you had the booklets, because 2 weeks from tonight is when we'll actually take the vote on whether or not to adopt the budget. So hopefully between now and then, you'll be able to look at it a little bit closer, and then probably at that time where we're trying to adopt it, if there are any questions, we can address them at this time. But tonight, for the sake of brevity and for the sake of what we have here presented, I'll just go through it fairly quickly. But what you'll see is there's a couple things that are new this year. One, there was an increase in the base, so our base aid per pupil went up a little bit, which is a welcome thing within our budget, as well as the ESSER funds. And so the ESSER funds, as you might recall, are those funds that are given to us that are supposed to help us and help our students in terms of getting them back into the classroom, helping with what COVID-19 did to our academic community. And you can see there that our plan for the ESSER 2, which you might recall from a presentation that Fred did a little while ago, was about a $2.8 million expenditure for learning recovery and HVAC updates. So making sure that we have the right equipment within the school district, circulating air. We've talked about before about ionizers and other things that we're putting in so that can help the air quality of our facilities for our students increase. And then, of course, that learning recovery. So if you're looking at that, you're thinking about things that we did in terms of after-school programs, in terms of summer school programs, things that are going to help bridge the learning gap for students as they return back to the classroom. ESSER 3, we're expecting, we don't have, but we're expecting to be able to apply for about $5.1 million. And that is, again, for student-safe return plans. So this is the plan that is still in development right now, but ultimately it's asking how are you going to transition those students that have fallen far behind, and what's the academic plan to get them to where they need to be. So luckily there are some funds set aside for that, and so you'll be hearing more about that as the year progresses, but wanted you to know where it's sat kind of within our overall budget planning. And then something else that's new this year is the revenue neutral rate notification. I'll go into that a little bit more, but just know it's another step where we're having to make sure that we're clear to the public what it is exactly we're doing financially in terms of mill levies, in terms of what we're expecting to spend in the upcoming year, and making sure that the public is clear on what that is so that if there's any concern or if there's any questions, they can go ahead and come to a hearing, again, which is going to be in 2 weeks, and make their voices heard, much like some folks have here tonight. So, just a real quick look at some of the highlights. You'll see what our estimated weightings are. And for those of you that are sitting at home, and please jump in, Fred, if you want to help me a little bit, if I might explain it not exactly right, but basically the weightings is funding that we receive based on a set group of criteria where the state especially is interested in helping certain populations, or helping getting certain populations to perform at higher levels, or providing funding for those populations so that they can catch up and be performing as well as their peers. So you can see what some of that is. Basically, I'll jump down to like bilingual FTE. So how many students that we have that are really needing that second language services, and we're reporting around 30. If you go to vocational, some of those kids that are getting that vocational education, how many are there? And then the one that I really pay attention to quite a bit is this at-risk FTE. So those are folks that have been qualified for at-risk for one reason or another. It could be financial, it could be other factors that influence why that student would be declared at risk. The numbers aren't quite as important as just to know kind of what the overall trend is. And so if you look at it probably 3 years, these numbers are pretty flat. So I think that's a good indicator that we're not necessarily losing that battle, but we're not also getting kind of some of the gains that we might want. And so that definitely, this funding that's increasing in those areas is going to help us do that. But as a whole, through the community, those numbers have stayed pretty flat. Please.
Just to clarify the at-risk, so everyone is clear, that is that proxy for the free or reduced lunch. So that was that home economic survey that we also ask all parents. That is the point that determines whether or not as a kid we get at-risk funding for that kid. So there's no other factors that are taken into account to determine that. It's only that particular metric there. And also, just to kind of keep in mind too, those weightings, they change every year based upon what we count on September 20. Our FTE, our enrollment, is either the year before or the year prior to that. So whatever our enrollment this year is what this year or last year is what we'll be able to use next year for the FTE. So.
Right.
On the at-risk, did that number change then a lot from previous years since the application's no longer?
Remember, last year we were down about 90 or 100 students, and it's about 0.484 FTE per student, so it's about $2,300 per. So what we're hoping with that push that we did with that home economic survey this year, that we get more applications that qualify for that, so that that's a higher number. We're estimating 653. I hope it's higher. I hope it's
You're
higher.
estimating 653 based off of the surveys.
Well, we just kind of have to roll the dice and try to estimate, because we get them to come in all the way up through September 20.
So we don't have the numbers back for the survey yet?
No.
Well, we have the numbers that we have now, but we have to remember that will change. So this is the estimate that he's using for the budget.
All right, this is what you're going to see in the newspaper when it comes out. I don't expect you to be able to necessarily read it, but it is what's in the budget book, and it is what we're putting aside for each one of the allocations within the school district, as well as what's going on in terms of debt service and in terms of expenditures. We also have a section in there that's laid out for the rec centers, because you know they fall underneath us for taxing purposes, and so their section is in there as well. But there's one thing that I wanted to point out to you, because though you can't see it real well, this is what I don't want necessarily to feel like it's hidden in there. And that is that there is going to be a 0.5% increase in the mill levy with this budget. Now, it's not something necessarily that we have much control over, because it's a result of the district's past practice with their bonds. And as many of you that have a finance background know, as a bond starts heading towards its maturity date, it actually increases in the payment size that it requires. And so ours is reaching towards the end of its maturity dates on several of them, and so our payments on those bonds are going to increase. And so we're anticipating those increased payments. Now, the good sign is that, well, we have some bonds that are about to retire, but we still have to make it through that period of what those last payments look like, which is going to be about 0.5. It's actually a 0.5 and change % increase. And so as that comes closer, again, that's why that's happening, because we need enough cash in reserves to be able to make those payments. Okay? Does anyone have any questions about that? So I want to make sure, especially for the folks at home, that
If you want to take a note, it's Code 99 in the budget book is the page that he was referencing there. Code 99 is towards the end of the budget there. So.
And we can't use any other funds to pay those bond payments, right? So we have to increase to make those payments.
Yes.
We can't like transfer money from the general fund to pay the increased bond.
That I don't believe you can. I don't believe you can, because that's why you have that bonded indebtedness.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that's there. It's not like we could switch money from one place to the other. We have to pay it from bond.
right. And the board at that time, when they were approving those bonds, would have known that this piece was part of it.
And you refinanced a couple of years ago, if I remember correctly.
2000.
So.
Do you know when all of our bonds will be paid off? All of our current ones?
Well, I do. I did give a schedule to. I can go ahead and send that out to you.
2026.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, I believe you guys might have it.
And that's almost a 0.5 mil increase.
Yeah.
Probably not a 0.5%, a 0.5 mil.
0.5 mil, yeah.
Slightly less than 0.5. When you look at that Code 99, there towards the bottom, and if you go over the last 2 fiscal years and you compare like LOB and general fund, and then at the very bottom where it talks about the total number of mills, you'll see where that increase is in these net bond indebtedness.
Where I was saying, hold on. Okay. And then also as well, there's this thing that you're going to see in there called the net revenue neutral rate. And that it sounds nasty at the first sentence of it, but just give me a chance. that we're going to exceed it by 0.67%. So what this is that the state put in a new regulation this year, again, so that we're perfectly disclosing what's going on, where the district has to say about how much over last year's expenditures or last year's allotment we're going to be, and ours came in at about 0.67%. And so what you're going to see, again, in the next 2 weeks, we're going to put in the paper a notice that says what that rate is, how we plan to exceed it. But what I want you guys to know is that I actually personally don't know of any district that's not exceeding it, because it's next to impossible to not exceed it, because our properties are generally going up. And so even if you have the exact same rate charged to property to generate your revenue, that property value goes up, you're generating more money. And so effectively, we're kind of caught in that situation where it's not an intentional thing, but if your property value goes up, then you're going to pay more in taxes for it, which again is going to result in the school district getting a larger portion. I don't think it's opinion, but it's 0.67%, but that's what it's going to end up being for our community. And so this is what the actual notice looks like in the paper. And you'll notice there it's going to be signed by Mallory and the board clerk, but it effectively tells them down here what our actual tax rate was, what that percentage was, and then what the neutral rate was at 24.62, and then 0.612, and then I'm estimating that we're going to actually be around 25.298. So there's a slight difference in there, but that's ultimately what we have to disclose. So the public knows that we're not breaking even with the same amount that we received last year. Anything to add to that one? Okay. So again, it's a lot to throw at you guys tonight, but we wanted to make sure you had the information up front so that you have 2 weeks. There's no problem at all answering questions 2 weeks from now when you've had a chance to dig into it, and maybe I can get you some of that other information you asked for. But it's a fairly flat budget. Once you look through it, there's nothing in there that's going to jump out at you. The 2 things that we thought would jump out at you, we've already brought to your attention, so you know what they are. But other than that, it's a pretty flat and straightforward budget. And that is all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item is to convene an executive session. How long do you think it will be?
The first executive session will be dealing with personnel, so probably 5 minutes is all we should need. And we'll need to have Shanda Swanson, myself, Jane, and then the rest of you.
I move that the board convene an executive session for the purpose of discussing issues concerning an employee pursuant to the common exception regarding personnel matters of non-elected personnel, and that the board return to the open meeting in this room at 7:35. Edwin Rankin and the teacher are invited to join the executive session.
And Jane Nichols.
And Jane Nichols.
Second.
All those in favor? 7-0.